We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 50a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a Mishnah Meseches Erchin to answer the question of Reb Chia bar Avin. Again, Reb Chia bar Avin's question is, if you have a situation where you can either bring the carbon Talmud tomorrow, or instead you could use the animal for the carbon Musaf today, so which takes precedence? And the Gemara brought this Mishnah Meseches Erchin. The Mishnah Meseches Erchin says that there cannot be less than 6 inspected lambs in the Lishkas Hatzloim, in the chamber of the lambs, because you have a situation where Rosh Hashanah could fall out right next to Shabbos. It'll be a 3-day yontiv. Each day you're going to need 2 animals for a carbon Talmud, and so therefore there cannot be less than 6. That you'll have 2 per day, again for the carbon Talmud. And the Gemara initially said on the previous Amud that what is the situation in this Mishnah? This Mishnah is obviously talking about a situation where there are not enough animals, and we see that the carbon Talmud takes precedence. That's the whole point of the Mishnah, that you're not going to bring the Musafin on these days. You don't have enough animals, and instead you're just going to use the 6 animals for the 2 carbon Talmuds every single day. That's what the Gemara initially thought, and so therefore that would answer Reb Chia bar Avin's question. It means that the answer to the question is that the carbon Talmud takes precedence. And the Gemara then says that that's not actually the explanation of the Mishnah. The explanation of the Mishnah is that you can't have less than 6 because the Mishnah is following Ben Bagbag. Ben Bagbag holds it specifically by carbon Talmud that you need to have the animal inspected 4 days early, and that's what the Mishnah is referring to. It's talking about the fact that you need to have at least 6 because you're going to have these 6 inspected early before the 3-day yontiv starts, and that way they'll be ready in order to use them as the carbon Talmuds again over that 3-day yontiv of Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos. But the Gemara then asked on the previous Amud, if that's the case, there should actually be a 7th animal that's needed, because the morning right after the 3-day yontiv is over, there's not going to be time to inspect an animal in that situation, so you're going to have pre-inspected that animal as well, and so therefore again you're going to have a 7th animal. I understand already the one in the afternoon, the day after the 3-day yontif, so there already you can go find an animal that was inspected 4 days earlier. You're not going to be able to do that in the morning right after the yontif, and so therefore the Gemara now continues and says, Mikol Mokom Shiva Hava. Nevertheless, it really should be 7, not 6, and so therefore that cannot really explain this Mishnah in Erchin. And so the Gemara continues and says, Ella rather, Tana Bial Makoi. The Tana of the Mishnah actually is not talking about on a situation of a 3-day yontif. It's talking about in general, you're supposed to have this many animals that are ready to go in the Lishkas HaTzloim. Umay kedei l'Shabbos ubeis yomim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. Why does the Mishnah say you have to have enough for Shabbos in the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah? That's just simona bialma. That's just a siman to remember that it's 6. But really, it just is a general rule that there needs to be 6. Rashi explains, Tana bi'alma koi, simona bi'alma nokat. Kilomar, what it means to say is as follows. Haida nokat shisha, when it says that you have to have these 6 animals, these 6 lambs, lav l'Shabbos ubeis yomim dafka kamer. It doesn't mean for a situation of Shabbos in the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Ela afilu kol yemos hachol, ba'inan belishka vav teloim. Even in general, on any normal days, you're going to need to have in the lishka 6 teloim. Kulon mevukarin dalid yomim kodem shchita. They all have to be inspected 4 days before the slaughtering. Levad yom hashchita, besides for the day of the shchita. Shahayu sham b'chol yom shisha ru'uyin lito. There should always be 6 that are ready to be taken. Ezu shnayim mehen sheyir, to whichever 2 he wants to take. Kigon deviyom chinuch hava bo shisha mevukarim dalid yomim kodem v'natlu beis biyom rishon. Again, for example, let's say on the day of the inauguration, so then they had 6 that were inspected 4 days beforehand. V'natlu beis biyom rishon. Let's say they took 2 on that first day. Uvikru shnayim, and then they inspected 2. V'chnisan tachtein, and those would be the replacements. Liyom beis for the second day, not lu beis. On the second day, rather, they took another 2 min harishonim from the earlier ones. Uvikru beis, and then they inspected another 2 min hashuk from the marketplace. V'nosnu shnayim tachtein, and then they had another 2 as replacements. L'shlishi not lu beis min harishonim uvikru shnayim, and this kept going again. And then on the third day, they took 2 from the earlier ones and they inspected 2 other ones tachteim acherim. V'chnisu tachtein isharu sham shisha min harishonim liyom revi yitlu od beis min harishonim v'ashnayim shenisbakru barishon yuruyin shnayim shel rishon ushnayim shel sheni ushnayim shel shlishi v'chein kulam liolam. It would just go on like this forever. Yu sham shisha ru'uyin lishacha. They always made sure that they would have 6 available. And again, the idea just is simona bialma. The Mishnah is just giving you a way to remember, a sign, a way to remember that it was 6. Shalotita begirsa imvav oh hey odalid. You shouldn't make a mistake. Is it 6? Is it 5? Is it 4? So you just remember Shabbos in the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, and then you'll understand that it's a total of 6. But it's just a general Mishnah, and it has nothing to do with Rav Chia bar Avin's question. It would not resolve that question at all. And the Gemara continues, Dekanami, we can prove this as well from the language of the Mishnah in Erchin. To Katani, because it says in the Mishnah, Kedei l'Shabbos, it says, enough for Shabbos. V'lo Katani l'Shabbos u'lebeis yamim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't say for Shabbos and for the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. That implies we're not actually talking about a situation of a 3-day yontiv. We're just giving you a siman of how many animals are needed in that chamber. And the Gemara says, Shema Minah. Indeed, we see that from the language of the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Lo hikrivu keves baboker, if they didn't bring the lamb in the morning. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, V'kula haisa kreva bein harbayim, it was all brought in the afternoon, she'in mechanchin as mizbeach hazav el biktoras asamim, because they only initiated the golden mizbeach, the inner mizbeach, with the ketoras asamim, and this will all be elaborated upon in the Gemara. But the Gemara first says, Chinuch mandekar shmei, it's mentioned all of a sudden in this Mishnah, the idea of the inauguration of the Mizbeach, the inauguration of the Mishkan and various vessels in the Mishkan. Why is that even mentioned? Whoever mentioned anything about inauguration? And the Gemara says, Chisure Michsera, there are words missing in the Mishnah of Hachi Katani. This is what the Mishnah actually should say. Lo hikrivu keves baboker, if they didn't bring the lamb in the morning, again, there was a Talmud that was brought in the morning and a Talmud brought in the afternoon. So the Mishnah says, if they didn't bring the lamb in the morning, lo yakrivu ben harbaim, then they should not bring the one in the afternoon. Now, when is that true? That's shalom eschanech hamizbeach. That's talking about if you have a new mizbeach and it was never initiated, it was never inaugurated, so it shouldn't be that the first carbon tamid that's brought in that mizbeach is the one bein harbayim. That shouldn't be. It needs to be the one brought in the morning. Avol neschanech hamizbeach. But once the mizbeach already has been inaugurated, it's been used already. It's not a brand new mizbeach. So then, even if they didn't bring the one in the morning, yakrivo bein harbayim. So then they do bring the one in the afternoon. They will bring the tamid shel bein harbayim. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, now when is this true? Bisman shahayu anusin oshogegin. That's if the reason they didn't bring it in the morning was it was something that was out of their control or it was a mistake. So then we say again, they bring the one in the afternoon, the tamid shel ben arboyim. Avalim hayu mezidin, but if they did it on purpose, let's say it was on purpose, lo hikrivu kavis baboker, that they didn't bring the sheep in the morning, so lo yakrivu ben arboyim, then they do not bring it in the afternoon. Lo hiktiru ketoras baboker, if they didn't bring the ketoras in the morning, yaktiru ben harbayim, then they do bring the one, they do burn the incense of the afternoon. And the Gemara continues and asks, Minohani Mili, from where do we know this? How do we know that if they're inaugurating the Mizbeach, that the first keves should not be the one in the afternoon? The Tanu Rabbanan, as the sages taught in the following Brisa, V'yasa keves hasheni tasa ben harbayim, it says that the second sheep is brought in the afternoon, and so therefore sheni ben harbayim v'lo rishon ben harbayim, that teaches us the second one is in the afternoon, not the first one in the afternoon, meaning to say if they don't bring the one in the morning, the first one they bring should not be in the afternoon. Now, Ba'med Devarim Amurim, when is this true? Again, like we just said above, that's Shalom Neschanech HaMizbeach. That's if the Mizbeach was never inaugurated, it was never initiated. Avol Neschanech HaMizbeach, but once the Mizbeach was already inaugurated, initiated, so then Afilu Rishon Ben Harbayim, then even the first one can be brought in the afternoon, and again, that is consistent with what we just said above. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Eimosai, when is this true? Bizman Shayu Anusin Oshogegin, again, when it's out of their control that they don't bring it in the morning, or if it's a mistake. Avalim Hayu Mizidin, but if they did it on purpose, Lo Hikrivu Keves Baboker, that they didn't bring the sheep in the morning, Lo Yakrivu Ben Harbayim, then they do not bring it in the afternoon. Lo Hiktiru Ketoras Baboker, if they don't bring the incense in the morning, Yaktiru Ben Harbayim, then they do burn the incense in the afternoon. And the Gemara first asks on this, V'chi kohanim chatu mizbeach batel. What is Rabbi Shimon saying about this mizidin? If they do it on purpose, Rabbi Shimon seems to be saying that if they don't bring the kevis in the morning on purpose, so then it's not brought in the afternoon. But the kohanim sin and mizbeach batel, the mizbeach should be nullified. The mizbeach should sit idle because of that. That doesn't make sense. Just because the kohanim did a sin and they didn't bring the kevis in the morning, that's not a reason that nothing should go on the mizbeach in the afternoon. So what's going on with that line of Rabbi Shimon, with that argument of Rabbi Shimon? Amar Rava says, Hachi Kamar. This is what we're actually saying, and we're going to revise our understanding here of Rabbi Shimon. What it means is as follows. Lo yakrivu hein. All Rabbi Shimon is saying is, if that on purpose they didn't bring it in the morning, then they shouldn't bring it in the afternoon. Aval acherim yakrivu. But others are able to offer it in the afternoon. So we're not actually saying that it's not brought at all. We're saying that others are able to offer it, but not those who actually sin, not those who actually did it on purpose. Now, if that is the case, we're going to have to revise the understanding by the the Ketoras as well, because the whole point is to contrast the Ketoras from the Karban Tamid. But now we're saying that the Karban Tamid also is brought in the afternoon. So it must be that the Ketoras is brought even by the same individuals in the afternoon, which now the Gemara clarifies. Lo hiktiru Ketoras baboker, if they didn't burn the incense in the morning, even if they didn't do it on purpose, but yaktiru bein harbaim, those same Kohanim are allowed to burn it in the afternoon. That's not a problem. Tekevan de lo shchicha, since it's something that's not common, umiyasra, and it's also something that gives wealth, so chavivalu, it's beloved to them, velo pashi, and therefore we don't think they will be negligent. It's not something that's going to be something that they'll be negligent about in the future, so we don't impose a fine, a knas, so to speak, in that situation, and they themselves are allowed to bring it. And Rashi explains, Mi'asra, the Ketoras brings wealth, Ma'asheres, again, it brings wealth, Kedichsiv, as it's written, Yasimu Ketorah, it says that they're going to bring this Ketoras, Ochsiv Ba'asrei Borech Hashem Chelu, and then it says there's going to be blessings after, and so therefore, again, this is something that the Kohanim are not going to neglect, because it's something that brings them wealth when they offer the Ketoras. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, the Mishnah said, Rabbi Shimon says, V'chula, Haisa Kreva Ben Harboim, Rabbi Shimon says, again, if the Ketoras is not brought in the morning, so it's not that half of it is brought in the afternoon, the half that's normally brought in the afternoon, the entire thing is now brought in the afternoon. Shein mechanchen es mizbeach hazav ela b'ketoras hasamim, because the way they inaugurate the golden mizbeach is through the ketoras hasamim, specifically shel bein harbaim, the one that is brought, bein harbaim, the one that is brought in the afternoon. And the Gemara asks, V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso, b'ketoras hasamim shel shachar, on the contrary, the way they inaugurated the mizbeach hazav was the ketoras hasamim that was brought in the morning, not the ketoras hasamim that's brought in the afternoon. So what does the Mishnah mean with this line? And the Gemara says to that, Tanoi, it's actually machlokas Tanoim. Our Mishnah says that the ketoras hasamim of the afternoon inaugurated the mizbeach hazav. The brayso says the ketoras hasamim of the morning inaugurated the mizbeach hazav, the golden inner mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Mistabra command Amar b'ketoras hasamim shel bein harboim. It makes sense, like the one who says that the mizbech hazav, the inner golden mizbeach, was inaugurated with the ketoras hasamim, with the burning of the ketoras that took place in the evening or in the afternoon. Tichsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, baboker beitivu es haneros yaktireno. It says in the morning when they cleaned out the neros of the menorah yaktireno, they would burn the incense. Now, if they were cleaning out the menorah in the morning, it must have already been lit the evening before. Ilav da'avid hadlaka meyorsa, if they didn't light from the evening before, hatava b'tzaf from hechas, how are they cleaning anything out in the morning? And so therefore it comes out that the menorah was certainly first used in the evening. That's when it was lit, that's when it was inaugurated, and the fire on the mizbach hazav is connected to the fire of the menorah. That was also, the presumption over here is that also was inaugurated at the same time, and so therefore it makes sense to say that all took place bein harboyim. And the Gemara continues, Ulaman Domer Victoras Hasamim Shel Shachar. Now, according to the one who says that it was the burning of the incense in the morning which inaugurated the Mizbach Hazav, so Gomer mi Mizbach Ha'ola, so according to them, Man Domer, we simply learn from the Mizbach Ha'ola, the Mizbeach, the outer Mizbeach, which is for the Karban Ola, which is for the Karbonos, the animal Karbonos, Malahalan B'Tamid Shel Shachar. Now, just like the Mizbach Ha'ola was inaugurated with the Tamid Shel Shachar, the morning Tamid, Afkan Victoras Hasamim Shel Shachar, so too over here, it's the Ketoras Hasamim of the morning. Rashi explains, Ilav David Mayorsa had laka mimai boy lesakin letzafar. What are you fixing? What are you cleaning in the morning if you didn't light at night? And the point again is, Alma chinuch menorah ben harboim. You see that the chinuch of the menorah, the inauguration of the menorah, was in the afternoon, in the evening time. V'kevan de menorah nischancha bo'erev. And if that's true, of the menorah was inaugurated in the evening, Ketoras nami tchilasa bo'erev, the Ketoras also, it was initiated in the evening. Techsiv, because that's written in the pasuk of Vahalos Aaron Esaneros Bein Harbaim Yaktireno. These two are connected in the pasuk. Vahalos Aaron Esaneros, when Aaron lit the Neros, Bein Harbaim Yaktireno. Bein Harbaim is when it would be burned, and so therefore again the initiation takes place at the same time. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, V'lo es ha-shulchan ella belechem haponim b'Shabbos. The shulchan, that was initiated, that was inaugurated with the lechem haponim on Shabbos itself. And the Gemara says, Ella b'chol ichnuchehu de lo mechanech. Now it sounds like the Mishnah is saying that on the weekday, as opposed to Shabbos, on the weekday, so the shulchan was not inaugurated on a weekday. But ha-kedushe mikdash, but it sounds like it was in fact sanctified, meaning the bread itself was in fact sanctified, even in the weekday. Is that possible? And Rashi here explains the question, Hakidusha Mekadesh, is it sanctified Lelechem im Yastiru olav b'chol? Let's say you would arrange the bread on the weekday on the Shulchan, would it be Mekadesh? Would the bread be sanctified? This is Bitmiya, this is being asked actually as a question. What's the question? Because we've established in Perek Shtei Alechem later on, the lo Mekadesh lechem ela b'Shabbos, that the lechem actually is only sanctified on Shabbos. Even if it's on the table many days, that's nothing. The lo kadosh, it's not kadosh lo lipasel b'yotzei. It's not holy in the sense that it's not going to be disqualified through yotzei, through leaving the proper area, v'lo l'shem psul, not in terms again of these disqualifications. But the point over here is that the implication is kiddushay mikdash, that it's only the inauguration of the shulchan, but apparently the bread is able to be sanctified on a weekday, but that can't be. And the Gemara continues and answers, Higufa kamashmal, and actually no, that's exactly what the Mishnah is teaching. It's teaching the chinuch v'kiddush the shulchan b'Shabbos. So it's teaching that both the chinuch, the inauguration of the shulchan, and the sanctification of the shulchan of the lechem aponim, that has to be on Shabbos. Kediktani seifa, and that's just like we learn at the end of the Mishnah. As the Mishnah goes on, it says v'loas hamenorah ela b'shiva neiroseh bein harbayim. It says that the menorah also, how is that inaugurated? It's inaugurated with the 7 neiros, with the 7 candles bein harbayim. And Rashi explains the seifa, why that's a proof. Kidekatani seifa u'menorah eina mekadeshes. The menorah we know is not mekadeshes. Kilomar v'chol milsadido eina ela ben harboyim. We know that everything happening with the menorah happens ben harboyim. Da'inu hadlaka, meaning to say the hadlaka, the lighting of the candles also, everything happens ben harboyim. And hachanami, here also that's what we're saying. Kol mili didei the kiddush v'chinuch the shulchan b'Shabbos. Everything with the shulchan, the inauguration of the shulchan, and the fact that it sanctifies the lechem aponim, that happens on Shabbos, just like the menorah. The menorah's inauguration, but also the fact that it's mekadeshes, that the lighting of the candles takes place at that time in the evening, that all happens at the same time. That's how you understand the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in the Brisa, Zeu ketoras she'also liyochid al mizbeach hachitzon. This is an example of the ketoras which an individual was able to bring on the outer mizbeach. V'horoas shohaisa, but this was a ruling just for that time. In other words, the Brisa is saying there was a time where there was a ketoras that an individual brought on the outer mizbeach, but it was just a horoas shah, it was just a ruling for that particular time in history. In general, that is not done. Now the Gemara wants to clarify, what is this Brisa talking about? Heicha, and where are we talking about? Which situation was there this ketoras for a yochid on the mizbeach hachitzon? And the Gemara answers, Amar Papa says, B'Nesiim, we're talking about at the times of the Nesiim. When the Nesiim brought their offerings, there was a ketoras, and that ketoras, each one of the Nesiim brought his ketoras, and it was brought in the outer mizbeach. But the Gemara now draws an inference from this brisa. Ela yochid al mizbeach hachitzon hu delo. So does that imply that an individual cannot bring ketoras on the outer mizbeach, ha al mizbeach hapnimi makriv, but an individual is allowed to bring on the inner mizbeach? That's not true. V'su, and further, al mizbeach hachitzon yochid hu delo. Is that mean to imply that on the outer mizbeach an individual cannot? Hatzibur mikravu, but a community is allowed to bring a ketoras, an incense, on the outer mizbeach? That's also not true. V'atanya, as we learned in a brisa, yachol yeh yochid misnadev umevi kayotze bo nedava. One might think that an individual can make a donation of a ketoras and bring a donated ketoras, v'korei ani ba motzas vasecha tishmor ve'asisa, and we'll refer to that as the person has to keep his word. He makes a vow, he has to do it. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, lo salu olav ketoras zor. It says you can't bring such a ketoras. Now yachol lo yeh yachid mevi she'ein mevi chovas o kayotze. But now one might think that an individual is not allowed to do that because there's no obligation like that for the individual. So if there's no obligation, so then there can't be a donation either. Rashi explains, Yachol yachid hu delo yavi ketoras nadava. One might think an individual can't bring a donated ketoras. Sharei dinu shalom atzinu she'imei v'chovaso kayotze ba. There's no ketoras that's an obligation for an individual. Sharei ketoras chova liyachid lo matzinu. We don't find a ketoras obligation for the individual, and maybe that's the reason why there's no donated ketoras. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Amud Beis.